卡罗琳·莱维特。这位风头正盛的白宫发言人面对记者毫不示弱，反应迅速，言辞犀利，擅长舌战群儒，被誉为特朗普政府最忠实的代言人之一。他的强硬风格让人想到中国外交部的战狼发言人，因此有人称他是美版战狼。
Thanks, Caroline.
You're welcome.
If we could just step back for a second. When President Trump last addressed the BRT when he was on the campaign trail, his big push was on tax cuts. He's going there today as he's proposing tax hikes in the form of tariffs.
Not true.
And I'm curious
He's not doing
why
that.
he's prioritizing that over the tax cuts.
He's actually not implementing tax hikes. Tariffs are a tax hike on foreign countries that, again, have been ripping us off. Tariffs are a tax cut for the American people, and the president is a staunch advocate of tax cuts. As you know, he campaigned on no taxes on tips, no taxes on overtime, no taxes on Social Security benefits. He is committed to all three of those things, and he expects Congress to pass them later this year.
I'm sorry, have you ever paid a tariff? Because I have.
That's
They
it.
don't get charged on foreign companies, they get charged on the importers.
And ultimately, when we have fair and balanced trade, which the American people have not seen in decades, as I said at the beginning, revenues will stay here, wages will go up, and our country will be made wealthy again. And I think it's insulting that you are trying to test my knowledge of economics and the decisions that this president has made. I'm now regret giving a question to the Associated Press. Well, I think Canada is a neighbor. They are a partner. They have always been an ally. Perhaps they are becoming a competitor now. But as the president also laid out in his Truth Social post today, he believes that Canadians would benefit greatly from becoming the 51st state of the United States of America. And I actually looked into some of the research about the cost of living in Canada, and the cost of living is much higher than it is here in the United States of America. The average cost of a home in Canada is much higher. In Quebec, the highest tax rate for an income of $150,000 or more is 53.3%, more than half of Canadians' incomes they are being taxed on. So the president has made it clear that he believes Canadians would be better served economically, militarily, if they were to become the 51st state of the United States of America. We are in a period of economic transition. We are in a period of transition from the mess that was created under Joe Biden in the previous administration. Joe Biden left this country in an economic disaster. Several statistics to point out. The delinquency rate on credit card loans increased 63% under Joe Biden, hitting a near 12-year high. Under Joe Biden, all net job growth went to foreign-born Americans. Real wages declined by 1.5% under Joe Biden. And as we all know, and this administration continues to combat, prices soared more than 20% under Joe Biden because of his reckless spending and economic policies. So we are in a period of transition from that economic nightmare under a president who had no idea what he was doing, never held a private sector job in his life, into a golden age of American manufacturing under a businessman and a deal maker in chief in President Donald J. Trump, who is implementing the formula that we know works. Look at President Trump's results in his first term. If people are looking for certainty, they should look at the record of this president. That's why the American people re-elected him back to this office. And look at everything that President Trump has already done and his team has already done in just 51 days. The massive efforts to deregulate, tax cuts, which we need Congress to pass the Trump economic agenda, the Trump tax cuts, which will unleash economic growth. And the president also addressed this directly, I will point out as well, when you look at what he said on Air Force One. And he said he wants the American people to have so much money in their pockets they don't even know what to do with it. That's the intent of this administration, and we're working very hard every day on that goal.
Second, does the administration believe that it needs to charge a green card holder with a crime to be eligible for deportation?
Well, in fact, Secretary Rubio reserves the right to revoke the visa of Mahmoud Khalil, and I'm glad you brought this up. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Secretary of State has the right to revoke a green card or a visa for individuals who serve or are adversarial to the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States of America. And Mahmoud Khalil was an individual who was given the privilege of coming to this country to study at one of our nation's finest universities and colleges. And he took advantage of that opportunity, of that privilege, by siding with terrorists, Hamas terrorists who have killed innocent men, women, and children. This is an individual who organized group protests that not only disrupted college campus classes and harassed Jewish American students and made them feel unsafe on their own college campus, but also distributed pro-Hamas propaganda, flyers with the logo of Hamas. That is what the behavior and activity that this individual engaged in. And I have those flyers on my desk. They were provided to me by the Department of Homeland Security. I thought about bringing them into this briefing room to share with all of you, but I didn't think it was worth the dignity of this room to bring that pro-Hamas propaganda. But that's what this individual distributed on the campus of Columbia University. And this administration is not going to tolerate individuals having the privilege of studying in our country and then siding with pro-terrorist organizations that have killed Americans. We have a zero tolerance policy for siding with terrorists, period. To the woman in the purple, because I saw you were making a face at my previous answer, so what's going on? Because these colleges and these protests have again put out Hamas propaganda. The flyers that have been distributed call for violence. The flyers that have been distributed have the logo of an organization that has held Americans hostage, that murdered innocent babies, that murdered men, women, and children. They are a designated foreign terrorist organization, and we are not going to tolerate non-citizens, foreigners who come here on a visa engaging in such behavior, siding with terrorists. And the Secretary of State reserves the authority to revoke the green card or the visa of an individual who serves as an actually it says right here, reasonable grounds to believe that the alien's presence or activities in the United States would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences to the United States. And I think siding with Hamas makes that quite clear. Secretary Rubio exercised that authority, and we fully believe that we are going to move forward with more arrests, as President Trump previewed in his statement yesterday. And the president put out a statement after seeing those comments and said that it would be there would be grave consequences imposed on Canada if they think about shutting off electricity for the United States of America and our citizens. And the president is also determined to ensure that we are depending on American electricity, not the electricity production of foreign nations, including our allies in Canada. As for conversations, there is continued correspondence between the president's team, particularly Secretary Lutnick, and the Canadians as well.
Scheme. Should Americans expect changes, big changes, to Social Security and Medicare?
President Trump has been unequivocally clear on this. He is going to protect Social Security and Medicare benefits and Medicaid for hardworking Americans who paid into these entitlement programs and deserve those hard-earned benefits. And unfortunately, the mainstream media has taken Mr. Musk out of context. I saw a Bloomberg headline that our team actually worked on getting updated and fixed because it was so wrong, and it took Mr. Musk out of context. What he was specifically referring to cutting was the waste and the fraud and abuse that does exist in these programs. According to an IG report from the Social Security Administration, there's more than $70 billion of fraud in the Social Security program alone that we know of. And so the president will continue to protect these programs for hard-working Americans, and actually cutting the waste, fraud, and abuse out of these programs will protect it for hardworking Americans.
Caroline, respectfully, he said around $500 to $700 billion. There was no evidence to claim that, and also if that is the case, that would represent more than a third of what Social Security paid out last year, maybe 20% of Social Security and Medicare.
Again, if you read his full quote, he said, "We think," so it's an estimate based on what he's seen. He's not saying definitively, he's saying that's what DOGE suspects and thinks. And that's exactly why DOGE was created, to ensure that we are investigating the fraudulent spending, the wasteful abuse across our federal government. And I would remind everybody in this room that 77% of the American people support this effort by Elon Musk and DOGE to identify such waste, fraud, and abuse.
Caroline.
Go ahead. Asking the President of the United States questions in limited spaces, such as the Oval Office in Air Force One, is a privilege that unfortunately has only been granted to a few. It is not a legal right for all. In fact, we know where there were parts of President Trump's border wall built and standing under the previous administration, illegal border crossings dropped 87% where there was a border wall. So the wall is an incredible deterrent factor for illegal migrant caravans. The president is committed to the continuation of the construction of the wall. And, you know, the previous administration actually sold off the resources that the Trump administration secured to build the wall. And that's an egregious misuse of the American taxpayers' money. They just let those resources rot on the southern border. They actually sold them for pennies on the dollar. So this administration, DHS and ICE and Customs and Border Patrol and Tom Homan and all of the great people you know who are working on this effort are committed to continuing the construction of President Trump's border wall.
Musk has obviously been doing a lot of work. He's been working every day, and a lot of the time weekends. He is designated as a special government employee, which means that he can only work 130 days per year. Is the White House expecting him to limit his work to 130 days, or are you going to work around those rules? Do you want to see him extend beyond the 130
So today is February 25th, so I think we've been here about 35 days roughly. So ask me in another 100 days.
The vast majority of the fentanyl is brought in through Mexico, not Canada. So what else does Canada need to do?
Well, I just told you, last year alone, there was a 2,000% increase in illegal fentanyl.
But it's only
You're
42
asking
pounds,
me,
Carol.
you're asking me for what the president's justification is for these tariffs. It's not up to you. You're not the president, Gabe. And frankly, I think it's a little bit disrespectful to the families in this country who have lost loved ones at the hands of this deadly poison. If you talk to them, and this president has, they are grateful that they finally have a president who is standing up to both Canada and Mexico, and most importantly to China as well. The president added an additional 10% tariff on China because this deadly poison is being produced in that country. It's being distributed through our neighbors, and there needs to be consequences for that, period. Peter.
Thank you, Caroline. If the U.S. has a longstanding policy that we do not negotiate with terrorists, then why is the U.S. now negotiating directly and for the first time ever with Hamas?
Well, when it comes to the negotiations that you're referring to, first of all, the special envoy who's engaged in those negotiations does have the authority to talk to anyone. Israel was consulted on this matter. And look, dialogue and talking to people around the world to do what's in the best interest of the American people is something that the president has proven is what he believes is good faith effort to do what's right for the American people.
Is it just about the hostages, or are they also talking about the president's plan to take over Gaza?
These are ongoing talks and discussions. I am not going to detail them here. There are American lives at stake. I would defer you to the Department of State for further details, but I'm not going to get into those talks here at this podium. Lindsay, good to see you.
Thank you, Caroline. Good to see you. So, speaking of tariffs, China said yesterday that they're ready for any kind of war with the U.S. Because of these tariffs that have been placed on them, and a Chinese spokesperson also said that the tariffs would not lead to a resolution of U.S. concerns about fentanyl originating in China. Can you speak to how the administration is planning on responding to that?
Well, I think Secretary Hegseth has responded to that this morning. He said that America will always be prepared to defend itself, especially under the leadership of this president in the Oval Office, and that certainly remains true. Again, when it comes to tariffs, the president has been very tough on China, not just now with 20% and more with the reciprocal tariffs that will hit on April 2nd, but look at what he did in his first term. There were billions of dollars worth of tariffs that he implemented on China, and it's quite telling that the previous administration did not rescind those tariffs because they realized the value that they had in not only deterring China, but also raising revenue here in the United States. First of all, let me just set the record straight. It is a privilege to cover this White House. It's a privilege to be the White House press secretary. And nobody has the right to go into the Oval Office and ask the President of the United States questions. That's an invitation that is given. And there are hundreds of outlets on this campus, many of you in this room who don't have the privilege of being part of that pool every single day and getting to ask the president questions. We reserve the right to decide who gets to go into the Oval Office, and you all have credentials to be here, including the Associated Press, who is in this briefing room today.
But isn't it retaliatory in nature is the argument, because the reason that the AP was barred, which they said was because they're not using the phrase Gulf of America, they're using Gulf of Mexico in line with their standards. And so the question here is this setting a precedent that this White House will retaliate against reporters who don't use the language that you guys believe reporters should use? And how does that align with
the First Amendment commitment that you were just talking about?
I was very upfront in my briefing on day one that if we feel that there are lies being pushed by outlets in this room, we are going to hold those lies accountable. And it is a fact that the body of water off the coast of Louisiana is called the Gulf of America. And I'm not sure why news outlets don't want to call it that, but that is what it is. The Secretary of Interior has made that the official designation in the geographical identification name server, and Apple has recognized that, Google has recognized that, pretty much every other outlet in this room has recognized that body of water as the Gulf of America, and it's very important to this administration that we get that right, not just for people here at home, but also for the rest of the world. President Trump is an outside-of-the-box thinker and a visionary leader who solves problems that many others, especially in this city, claim are unsolvable. Throughout the transition and during his inaugural address, President Trump made it known that the United States cannot and will not allow the Chinese Communist Party to continue with its effective and growing control over the Panama Canal. Following Secretary Rubio's successful first trip and visit there over the weekend, Panama's president said he will allow its participation in the Chinese Communist Party's it will no longer allow the participation in the Belt and Road Initiative. That participation will expire. This is significant because Panama was the first Latin American nation to join Belt and Road and now becomes the first to back away from it because of President Trump.
Is the U.S. prepared to remove Palestinians from Gaza by force?
The president is prepared to rebuild Gaza for Palestinians and all people in the region, peace-loving people who want real economic development and opportunity in the region. This is a region that has been controlled by Iranian-backed terrorists, Hamas, who have brutalized not just Israelis but Palestinians too. It is because of Hamas that you see those images on that screen, that Gaza has become a demolition site because Hamas launched that brutal attack on Israel on October the 7th. And so again, I would stress, President Trump wants to ensure that this can be a place where all people can live in peace. He is a peacemaker in chief. He made that very clear in his first term. And as for how that will be accomplished, the president and his team are talking with our allies in the region to consider next steps.
But should the American people be prepared to see U.S. military on the ground fighting a ground war against Hamas?
Again, the president has not committed to U.S. troops in the region.
But it is an option.
I have said that the president has not committed to that yet. Sure.
If I could just follow up on that, though, why not rule out the idea of committing U.S. troops? This has been a long-standing argument that the president has made really over the last decade or so, talking about endless wars and not something the U.S. wants. Why not rule out troops?
Because I think the president is very good when he's making deals and negotiating not to rule out anything because he wants to preserve that leverage in negotiations. And so I think that's what he's doing here. We are going line by line when it comes to the federal government's books. And this president and his team are making decisions across the board on, do these receipts serve the interests of the American people? Is this a good use of the American taxpayers' money? If it is not, that funding will no longer be sent abroad, and American taxpayers will see significant savings because of that effort. I think kids have already been exposed to discrimination, especially young women and girls who have been forced to shower in locker rooms with biological men, who have been forced to compete on playing fields with biological men, which is incredibly unfair and unsafe, and again, an incredibly unpopular policy with the American people. As for the actions that this executive order takes, I already laid those out at the beginning of the briefing. I'm happy to give you a copy of this fact sheet so you can let your audiences across the country know.
What's your message to schools who don't comply with this?
They should, because it's going to be federal law in about an hour and a half. I mean, look, our education system is failing students in this country. The Nation's Report Card, I brought it up in my remarks last week, it shows that fourth graders are not reading at the level they should. I believe it was 40% of them are proficient in reading. As the mother of a child, I want an education system that helps my child read and write, teaches him math, nothing else in the classroom. And the president is wholeheartedly committed to we can make academia great again in this country.